The twin suns of that Exarathian homeworld blazed brightly overhead, casting a golden glow over the grand arena. It was a day of celebration for the Empire, and the markets buzzed with life. The centerpiece of the festivities, however, was the auction, the galaxy's most exclusive event. Today, the offerings were rarer than usual, and the crowd eagerly gathered to see them. Alien dignitaries, merchants, and nobles filled the tiered seats, their eyes fixed on the central platform where the captives were displayed. Among them stood Commander Ethan Carter, a human from Earth. His wrists were bound with shimmering restraints, but his posture remained upright and defiant. Unlike the others who cowered or pleaded, Ethan's piercing gaze swept across the crowd as if daring anyone to meet his eyes. His defiance intrigued Queen Xylaria. From her elevated throne, she observed him closely. Xylaria was unlike any ruler. Her tall, regal frame was adorned with intricate armor made of iridescent metals, and her violet eyes shone with a sharp intelligence. As the ruler of the mighty Exarathian Empire, she was used to commanding respect and obedience, but something about this human stirred her curiosity. The auctioneer, a slender alien with elongated limbs, stepped forward and raised his voice. "Behold, the finest specimens from the human race, captured from the distant fringes of the galaxy. Resilient, resourceful, and full of fire." The bidding began. Ethan watched silently as the first few captives were sold, their hopes extinguished with the fall of the hammer. He felt a surge of anger, but he held it in check. Losing control wouldn't help him now. He needed a plan. When it was Ethan's turn, the auctioneer spoke with particular enthusiasm. "This one is special. A former soldier, a leader of his kind, strong-willed and unbroken. A true rarity. Who will start the bidding?" A ripple of interest swept through the crowd, but Xylaria raised her hand first. 50 million credits, she said, her voice calm but firm. Gasps echoed across the arena. It was an extravagant sum, even for royalty. Ethan clenched his jaw, unwilling to show fear, but acutely aware of what this meant. He had become a trophy, a prize for an alien ruler. 55 million, shouted another bidder from the crowd. Xylaria's eyes flickered toward the challenger, her expression unmoved. 60 million, she replied smoothly. The challenger hesitated, then sat back. No one dared outbid the queen. The auctioneer slammed the hammer down. "Sold. To Her Majesty, Queen Xylaria." Ethan was unceremoniously led off the platform and into the queen's private chambers. His mind raced as he was escorted through halls of polished stone and gleaming technology. The palace was both beautiful and intimidating, a testament to the Exarathian's power. But Ethan's focus was on escape. He wouldn't allow himself to remain a pawn in this alien empire. When the guards left him alone in a lavish chamber, he barely had time to take in the surroundings before Xylaria entered. Her presence filled the room, commanding attention. Yet, up close, Ethan noticed a strange warmth in her gaze, a curiosity that seemed at odds with her intimidating reputation. "You are different from the others," she said, her tone analytical. "You stood tall when others bowed. You looked me in the eye when others could not. Why?" Ethan crossed his arms, the restraints glowing faintly as they prevented him from using full strength. "Because I don't bow to anyone," he said firmly. "Not to you. Not to anyone else in this room." Xylaria raised an eyebrow, seemingly unbothered by his defiance. Instead, she looked amused. "Interesting. Humans are such curious creatures. Tell me, Commander Carter, are all of your kind so resilient?" "I guess you'll find out," Ethan replied, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an answer. Xylaria smiled faintly. "I bought you because I need something only a human can provide. Your people are known for their ingenuity, their ability to adapt and thrive under impossible conditions. My empire could benefit from such qualities. You will teach me." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse?" "You won't," Xylaria said simply. "Because you'll find that survival here depends on cooperation. But rest assured, I do not intend to harm you. Quite the opposite. Consider this an opportunity. Ethan didn't trust her, but he knew he couldn't fight her. At least not yet. For now, he'd play along, gathering information and waiting for the right moment to turn the tables. As Sileria turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Welcome to my court, Commander Carter. You'll find that this is no ordinary prison." The twin suns of the Exarathian homeworld blazed brightly overhead, casting a golden glow over the grand arena. It was a day of celebration for the Empire, and the markets buzzed with life. The centerpiece of the festivities, however, was the auction, the galaxy's most exclusive event. Today, the offerings were rarer than usual, and the crowd eagerly gathered to see them. Alien dignitaries, merchants, and nobles filled the tiered seats, their eyes fixed on the central platform where the captives were displayed. Among them stood Commander Ethan Carter, a human from Earth. His wrists were bound with shimmering restraints, but his posture remained upright and defiant. Unlike the others who cowered or pleaded, Ethan's piercing gaze swept across the crowd as if daring anyone to meet his eyes. His defiance intrigued Queen Sileria. From her elevated throne, she observed him closely. Sileria was unlike any ruler. Her tall, regal frame was adorned with intricate armor made of iridescent metals, and her violet eyes shone with a sharp intelligence. As the ruler of the mighty Exarathian Empire, she was used to commanding respect and obedience, but something about this human stirred her curiosity. The auctioneer, a slender alien with elongated limbs, stepped forward and raised his voice. "Behold, the finest specimens from the human race, captured from the distant fringes of the galaxy. Resilient, resourceful, and full of fire." The bidding began. Ethan watched silently as the first few captives were sold, their hopes extinguished with the fall of the hammer. He felt a surge of anger, but he held it in check. Losing control wouldn't help him now. He needed a plan. When it was Ethan's turn, the auctioneer spoke with particular enthusiasm. "This one is special. A former soldier, a leader of his kind. Strong-willed and unbroken. A true rarity. Who will start the bidding?" A ripple of interest swept through the crowd, but Sileria raised her hand first. 50 million credits, she said, her voice calm but firm. Gasps echoed across the arena. It was an extravagant sum, even for royalty. Ethan clenched his jaw, unwilling to show fear, but acutely aware of what this meant. He had become a trophy, a prize for an alien ruler. 55 million, shouted another bidder from the crowd. Sileria's eyes flickered toward the challenger, her expression unmoved. 60 million, she replied smoothly. The challenger hesitated, then sat back. No one dared outbid the queen. The auctioneer slammed the hammer down. "Sold. To Her Majesty, Queen Sileria." Ethan was unceremoniously led off the platform and into the queen's private chambers. His mind raced as he was escorted through halls of polished stone and gleaming technology. The palace was both beautiful and intimidating, a testament to the Exarathians' power. But Ethan's focus was on escape. He wouldn't allow himself to remain a pawn in this alien empire. When the guards left him alone in a lavish chamber, he barely had time to take in the surroundings before Sileria entered. Her presence filled the room, commanding attention. Yet up close, Ethan noticed a strange warmth in her gaze, a curiosity that seemed at odds with her intimidating reputation. "You are different from the others," she said, her tone analytical. "You stood tall when others bowed. You looked me in the eye when others could not. Why?" Ethan crossed his arms, the restraints glowing faintly as they prevented him from using full strength. "Because I don't bow to anyone," he said firmly. "Not to you. Not to anyone else in this room." Sileria raised an eyebrow, seemingly unbothered by his defiance. Instead, she looked amused. "Interesting. Humans are such curious creatures. Tell me, Commander Carter, are all of your kind so resilient?" "I guess you'll find out," Ethan replied, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an answer. Silarius smiled faintly. I bought you because I need something only a human can provide. Your people are known for their ingenuity, their ability to adapt and thrive under impossible conditions. My empire could benefit from such qualities. You will teach me. Ethan's eyes narrowed. And if I refuse? You won't, Silarius said simply. Because you'll find that survival here depends on cooperation. But rest assured, I do not intend to harm you. Quite the opposite. Consider this an opportunity. Ethan didn't trust her, but he knew he couldn't fight her. At least not yet. For now, he'd play along, gathering information and waiting for the right moment to turn the tables. As Silaria turned to leave, she paused at the door. Welcome to my court, Commander Carter. You'll find that this is no ordinary prison. Ethan didn't know, but he had a feeling that the answers wouldn't come easily. And so for now, he would wait and watch. He had learned one thing. Survival here would be more complicated than he had ever imagined. The sun had barely set, casting a crimson hue over the palace as Ethan paced in his small quarters. His thoughts were a storm, torn between the promise of freedom and his growing uncertainty about Silaria's true intentions. He hadn't made up his mind yet, but one thing was clear. He had to play the game carefully. If he agreed to help her, he would have to stay alert. Suddenly, the door slid open and a guard entered. Commander Carter, the Queen requests your presence immediately. Ethan followed the guard down the dimly lit hallways, his mind still reeling from the conversation with Idolaria. The palace was quiet now, its grandeur somehow colder in the dark. He was led into a war room, a large chamber filled with holographic maps of the Empire and flickering lights that cast strange shadows on the walls. Silaria stood at the center of the room, her arms crossed, her expression grim. She didn't even look at him when he entered. Instead, her gaze was fixed on the holographic display. Ethan felt an uneasy tension in the air, as if something was brewing. You're here, she said, her voice sharp. We have a problem. Commander. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A problem? Silaria nodded, her fingers tapping on the hologram. The image shifted, zooming in on a region of space near the outskirts of her empire. This is the sector controlled by House Ilthar, a rival faction within my empire. They'd been quietly plotting against me for months. But now, they've made their move. Ethan stepped closer, studying the display. Several fleets were clustered near the Ilthar homeworld, their positions strategically planned. Looks like they're preparing for war. Silaria's eyes darkened. Yes, they believe I'm weak. They think my leadership is faltering, and they plan to strike soon. They're ready to overthrow me. Ethan frowned. And you want me to help you stop them? Silaria turned to face him now, her expression fierce. I need more than just help. I need a strategy. I need someone who understands the art of war, someone who knows how to outthink the enemy. You've been trained in military tactics, Commander. I'm giving you a choice. Help me defend my empire, or stand aside. Ethan didn't hesitate. I'll help, but only on one condition. Silaria tilted her head, clearly intrigued. What is it? You keep your word. If we survive this, you honor the deal you made. Freedom, no tricks. She met his gaze without flinching. You have my word. Now will you help me, or will you let my empire fall? Ethan's mind raced. The stakes were higher now. If he didn't help, Silaria would lose everything, and he would lose his chance at freedom. It wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to himself that he could trust her. I'll help you, he said, but let's make sure we're ready for what's coming. Silaria studied him for a moment longer before nodding. Good, follow me. They moved quickly, and soon Ethan found himself in the palace's war planning chamber, where Silaria's most trusted advisors gathered. The room was filled with the hum of advanced technology and the low murmur of discussion. At the center of it all stood a large holographic map showing the movements of Ilthar's fleets. Silaria wasted no time. Commander Carter has military experience. He will assist us in formulating a strategy to defend the capital." Ethan nodded, taking the seat beside her. The room fell silent as the advisors turned their attention to him. He didn't have time to second-guess himself. This was his moment. "We need to act fast," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Ilfar's forces are too close to the capital for comfort. They'll hit us hard if we don't prepare. We need to send a message that we're ready to fight back, that we're not weak." Sileria looked at him with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "What do you propose?" Ethan pointed to the map, zooming in on Ilfar's fleet. "We hit them where they're not expecting. Use our smaller ships to create a diversion, pull their forces away from the capital. Once we've drawn them out, we strike with everything we've got. We hit hard, hit fast." Sileria leaned forward, clearly impressed. "A bold move." Ethan nodded. "It's risky, but if it works, we can cripple their fleet before they even reach the palace." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Sileria's eyes locked onto Ethan's, a look of approval in them. "You're right," she said after a pause. "We'll move forward with this plan, but you'll need to lead the attack." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that. Leading an attack against Ilfar's fleet was no small task, but he had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "Understood," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Let's make sure we're ready." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The palace's halls were filled with soldiers and officers preparing for battle. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was also a sense of purpose. For the first time since he'd arrived on this strange world, Ethan felt like he was part of something larger than himself. As the final preparations were made, Sileria approached him once more. She stood by his side, her usual regal composure giving way to something more human, vulnerable, perhaps even uncertain. "We'll succeed, Commander. I believe in this plan," she said, her voice quieter than before. Ethan met her gaze, seeing the weight of leadership on her shoulders. He wasn't sure what to believe about Sileria, but in this moment he saw something in her that made him think maybe she wasn't so different from the leaders he had known back on Earth. "Then let's make sure we win this," Ethan replied. With the battle ahead, both of them had a lot to lose, but they also had the chance to prove that together they could overcome the greatest threat to her empire. The command center was alive with activity. Bright holographic screens flickered with data, while soldiers and officers moved with a sense of urgency. Ethan stood at the center of it all, watching as his plans began to take shape. The tension was thick in the air, but he focused on the task ahead. The Empire's fate rested on the battle that would soon unfold. Sileria entered the command center, her steps steady, but her face showing a rare moment of uncertainty. Her violet eyes met Ethan's, and for the first time, he saw something beyond the cold exterior of a queen. There was fear there, but it was tempered with resolve. "Are we ready?" she asked, her voice firm but with a hint of anxiety that she quickly masked. Ethan nodded, pointing to the map displayed in the center of the room. "We have our diversionary forces in place, and the fleet is preparing for the main attack. The Ilfar fleet is moving as expected. It's all about timing now." Sileria's eyes scanned the map, her expression unreadable. She trusted Ethan's plan, but the risk was enormous. They were about to gamble everything on a strategy that could either save her empire or bring it to its knees. "We're counting on you, Commander," she said, her voice quieter now. "If this fails—" "It won't fail," Ethan interrupted firmly. "We're ready. We've got the element of surprise on our side." The Queen didn't respond, but Ethan could see the weight of the decision in her posture. The room fell silent for a moment, each person focused on their task. The distant hum of the palace's engines became louder as the fleet began to mobilize, readying itself for the confrontation ahead. Outside the command center, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the vast expanse of the palace grounds. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the holographic map, his mind running over every detail. There was no room for error. Hours later, the fleet was in position, and the first phase of the plan was set into motion. Ethan stood at the front of the bridge, watching the ships move into formation. His heart beat steadily in his chest as the massive warships moved with precision. The Ilfar fleet was still a few hours away, but their ships had already been detected. Ethan had no doubt that they would soon make their move. The tension among the crew was palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake. If the diversion worked, they would have a chance to strike Ilthar's fleet before they could launch an attack on the capital. But if the diversion failed, well, that would be a battle no one would want to fight. "Commander," the officer in charge of the diversion force spoke through the comms, "we are in position, awaiting your orders." Ethan took a deep breath. "Initiate the diversion. Move quickly. Draw them away from the capital." The officer's voice crackled back. "Understood. Diverting now." The order was given, and within moments, the smaller ships of the fleet moved toward the Ilfar fleet, sending out false signals designed to confuse their enemy. The Ilfar ships would be drawn toward the decoy, allowing the main force to launch a surprise attack. Sileria appeared at Ethan's side, her face tight with concentration. "Will it work?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll know soon enough," Ethan replied, his eyes locked on the flashing lights of the tactical display. For several long minutes, nothing happened. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines and the occasional communication over the comms. Ethan could feel the eyes of the crew on him, waiting for the moment when everything would change. Then the enemy fleet's movements shifted. The decoy had worked. The Ilfar ships were now splitting, some heading toward the fake signals while others remained in place. This was their chance. Ethan's pulse quickened. "All units, engage. Full speed ahead." The command was given, and the battle began. The ships of the Exarathian fleet roared to life, weapons charging as they closed in on the remaining Ilfar forces. The first shots fired lit up the dark expanse of space, the brilliant bursts of energy flashing like stars exploding in the night sky. Ethan's heart raced as he watched the chaotic battle unfold. From his position, he could see the smaller ships of the Ilfar fleet being torn apart by the concentrated fire from the Exarathians. The diversion had been a success, but the battle was far from over. Ethan's tactical mind raced as he issued orders, coordinating the strikes, keeping the pressure on the enemy while watching for any opening that could shift the tide. Sileria watched the battle unfold from the command center, her fists clenched. This was it. This was the moment that would define her reign. If they won, she would solidify her power. But if they lost, the consequences would be unimaginable. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and the battle raged on. Ethan's plan was working. Slowly, steadily, the Exarathian fleet was pushing the Ilfar forces back. But there was still danger. The Ilfar leaders were cunning, and they weren't going to give up easily. A sudden alarm blared across the ship, and the display flickered. Ethan's eyes snapped to the screen, and his stomach dropped. A massive Ilfar battleship had broken through the lines and was headed straight for the capital. Sileria's voice came over the comms, urgent and sharp. "Commander, we need to stop that ship. It's heading straight for the palace." Ethan's mind raced. If they didn't stop that ship now, everything they had fought for would be destroyed. He turned to the officer at the helm. "Full speed ahead. Target that battleship. Take it down." The officer nodded, and the ship surged forward, firing everything they had. The massive battleship was tough, but it couldn't withstand the concentrated fire of the Exarathian fleet for long. The battle was far from over, but they had one chance to stop this. Ethan's eyes were locked on the enemy ship, every part of him focused on the battle. This was the defining moment, the one that would decide it all. He could feel the weight of Sileria's trust on his shoulders, but he would not fail her. Not now. The massive Ilfar battleship loomed large in the distance, its dark hull cutting through the vast expanse of space like a shadow. Ethan stood on the bridge of the Exarathian flagship, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle raged around him, but everything felt like it was coming down to this one moment. Target locked. "Commander, The officer at the helm reported. Ready to fire. Ethan nodded. Take the shot. The flagship's cannons fired in unison, sending a barrage of energy blasts toward the Ilthar battleship. The impact was immediate. Bright, fiery explosions rippling across the enemy vessel's shields. The Ilthar ship returned fire, a massive beam of energy tearing through the void, narrowly missing the Exarathian flagship. The crew braced for the shockwave, but it never came. The shields held strong. Again, Ethan ordered, his voice steadied despite the chaos. The cannons fired again, this time more accurately. The enemy ship's shields flickered, struggling to maintain their integrity. Ethan's eyes never left the screen, watching as the Ilthar battleship tried to maneuver out of the way. But it was too late. A second round of blasts hit the ship dead-on, causing it to shudder violently. For a moment, it seemed like the battle would be won, but then the screen flashed red. Commander, incoming enemy reinforcements, the officer warned. Another wave of Ilthar ships entering the sector. Ethan's heart sank. The Ilthar had not given up yet. Even with their battleship damaged, they had more ships ready to fight. The tide of the battle was beginning to shift. Stay focused, Ethan barked. We need to finish what we started. Protect the capital at all costs. Outside the bridge windows, the space around the ships seemed to explode into chaos. New waves of Ilthar ships emerged from the shadows, cutting through the darkness and charging toward the Exarathian fleet. Their weapons fired relentlessly, a deadly dance of destruction that rocked the battlefield. Sileria's voice came through the comms, calm but resolute. Commander, we cannot allow them to break through. You must stop them now. Ethan's mind raced. The battle was escalating quickly, and the stakes had never been higher. If the Ilthar forces reached the capital, they would tear through it with ease. He needed a new plan, a way to turn the battle in their favor before it was too late. He quickly turned to the tactical officer. We need to draw their attention away from the capital. Deploy the decoy fleet again. Lead them away. The officer nodded, already working to execute the orders. Deploying decoys now. A series of smaller ships broke away from the main fleet, scattering in different directions to confuse the Ilthar forces. The enemy ships turned to chase the decoys, allowing the Exarathian fleet to regroup and focus its firepower on the remaining Ilthar ships. The distraction worked for a moment, but the Ilthar were relentless. Their superior numbers and tactical skill kept them pushing forward. Ethan could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on him. Prepare for a counterattack, Ethan ordered, his voice sharp and clear. We need to hit them hard, and we need to do it now. As the two fleets closed in, Ethan's mind flashed back to his earlier decision. He had promised Sileria that he would help her, that he would do everything in his power to protect her empire. Now he had to make good on that promise, no matter what it cost. The battleship's shields were failing, and the massive enemy ship was starting to list to one side. Ethan saw the opening he'd been waiting for. Now, he shouted. The entire Exarathian fleet fired in unison. The first salvo of energy blasts struck the Ilthar battleship, sending shockwaves through its hull. The ship's systems sparked and crackled, but it wasn't enough. The Ilthar ship began to break apart, its shields no longer able to withstand the bombardment. With a final, powerful explosion, the battleship was destroyed. The battlefield fell silent for a moment. It felt like an eternity. But just as quickly, the Ilthar reinforcements responded. A new wave of ships arrived, pushing back against the Exarathians with renewed fury. It was clear now. This was far from over. Commander, we're losing ground, the officer at the helm reported, his voice tense. The reinforcements are overwhelming us. Ethan's mind raced. There was no time to waste. He glanced toward Sileria, who had just entered the bridge. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. She could see the tide of battle turning as well. We can still win this, Commander, she said firmly. I believe in you. Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. He had to think fast, had to find a way to turn the tide. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. "We need to hit their command ship," he said, his voice calm but decisive. "Take out their leader, and the rest will fall into chaos." Sileria's eyes widened, understanding dawning in her gaze. "You're right. The command ship is the key. We need to destroy it before the Ilfar can regroup." Ethan nodded. "I'll lead the strike myself. Get the fleet ready for a coordinated assault." The crew moved quickly, preparing for the final, decisive strike. Ethan didn't hesitate. His mind was focused, his hands steady on the controls as the Exarathian fleet aligned for the final attack. The command ship was massive, a dark behemoth among the other Ilfar vessels. But it had a weakness, one that Ethan had spotted earlier. If they could target its central core, they could bring the entire ship down in one devastating blow. "Launch all fighters," Ethan ordered. "We're going straight for the command ship. Hit it hard." As the fleet surged forward, the battle reached its peak. Energy blasts filled the air. Ships were torn apart in the blink of an eye, but Ethan's resolve never wavered. This was the moment that would decide everything. The vast expanse of space was a battlefield. The sounds of explosions echoed in the distance as the two fleets clashed in a violent struggle. Ethan stood on the bridge of the Exarathian flagship, his eyes locked on the main screen as the Ilfar command ship loomed large in the distance. The battle was fierce, but the path to victory was clear. They had to take out the heart of the Ilfar fleet, and that meant destroying the command ship. "Commander, the fleet is ready," the tactical officer said, his voice filled with urgency. "We've synchronized the attack. On your mark." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Let's do this." He could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders, but he pushed aside any doubts. This was the decisive strike, the one that would determine the future of the Empire. Sileria's empire. The stakes had never been higher. Sileria stood beside him, her eyes filled with determination. She had trusted him to lead this attack, and he would not let her down. Her presence was a reminder of what was at risk, not just her throne, but her entire future. Ethan's heart raced, but he focused. He had trained for moments like this. Now, it was time to act. "All ships, target the command ship," Ethan barked. Full assault. The fleet surged forward, a wave of firepower aimed at the Ilfar flagship. The command ship was massive, a dark behemoth of steel and weaponry, but it had one weakness: the central core. Its heart was vulnerable, and that was where Ethan planned to strike. The enemy ships moved to intercept, but Ethan's forces were ready. The smaller ships darted around, drawing fire from the larger Ilfar vessels, while the flagship and its allies closed in on the command ship. It was a delicate dance of strategy, and Ethan was at the center of it all. The first wave of fire hit the Ilfar flagship, energy blasts rippling across its surface. The command ship's shields held for a moment, but Ethan's eyes never left the target. He knew the shields wouldn't last forever. The key was to keep the pressure on, to wear them down until they had an opening. Direct hit. The officer at the weapons console called out. "The shields are weakening." Ethan didn't wait. Hit them again, harder. The Exarathian fleet fired again, each shot carefully aimed at the core of the command ship. The blast struck with precision, causing the Ilfar flagship to shudder. The shields flickered, and for a brief moment, the command ship was exposed. "Now," Ethan shouted. The full might of the Exarathian fleet fired at once. The energy blasts collided with the core of the Ilfar command ship, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The massive ship's shields collapsed under the assault, and the central core began to fracture. Sileria stepped forward, her eyes wide as the enemy ship began to break apart. "We're doing it. We're winning." But the victory wasn't secure yet. As the Ilfar flagship started to crumble, the remaining Ilfar ships began to rally. The Ilfar fleet was regrouping for a final push, and Ethan knew they wouldn't give up without a fight. "Commander, we need to finish this," one of the officers said, his voice strained. "The Ilfar will retaliate." Ethan nodded, his face hardening. He couldn't let the Ilthar regroup. They had to strike now, before the enemy had a chance to recover. All ships, full assault, he commanded. No mercy. The remaining Ilthar vessels had no choice but to face the full wrath of the Exarathian fleet. The energy blasts from both sides filled the space around them, the explosions lighting up the dark void. Ethan's flagship surged forward, its weapons firing relentlessly. The Ilthar fleet was crumbling, but they were not defeated yet. Ethan could feel the tension in the air. The final moments of the battle were upon them. On the screen, the Ilthar command ship was disintegrating, its core now nothing but a smoldering ruin. But as it fell, the remaining Ilthar ships fought back with everything they had. Their desperation was palpable, but they were losing. The Exarathians had the upper hand. "Commander," the tactical officer called, "we have another wave of enemy ships approaching. They're coming in fast." Ethan cursed under his breath. It was not over yet. The Ilthar were throwing everything they had left into one final attempt to break through. But this time, the Exarathian fleet was ready. Ethan could see the fear in the faces of the Ilthar commanders. They knew they were beaten. "Prepare for the final strike," Ethan said, his voice cold and commanding. "This ends now." The Exarathian fleet closed in, firing on all cylinders. The Ilthar ships began to break apart one by one, their shields failing under the intense barrage. The remaining forces of the Ilthar were scattered, their lines broken. It was over. But as the last of the Ilthar fleet fell, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from finished. This battle was a victory, but there would always be more challenges ahead. Still, he knew that they had proven their strength. They had fought with everything they had, and now the Ilthar would know that the Exarathians would not fall easily. Cyleria stepped beside him, her eyes fixed on the screen. She didn't say a word, but there was a new sense of respect in her gaze. She knew that without Ethan's leadership, they would not have won. He had earned her trust, and in that moment, Ethan knew that his place in this empire was no longer uncertain. The battle had been won, but the war was still far from over. As the Exarathian fleet regrouped, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what would come next. But for now, there was a fleeting sense of relief. The empire had survived. The battlefield was quiet, the echoes of the war fading into the stillness of space. The once mighty Ilthar fleet had been shattered, its remnants scattered across the vast void. The Exarathian fleet, though battered, stood victorious. The command ship that had once been the heart of the Ilthar forces now lay in ruins, a testament to the power and strategy that had brought them down. Ethan stood on the bridge of the Exarathian flagship, watching as the last remnants of the enemy fleet were destroyed. The screens flickered with data, the quiet hum of the ship's systems filling the air. It was over. The battle had been won, but the cost had been high. There were losses on both sides, and the galaxy would never be the same. Cyleria entered the bridge, her presence as commanding as ever. Despite the victory, there was a sadness in her eyes, a weight that no victory could lift. The war was over, but there would be no easy path ahead. The destruction caused by the Ilthar and the battle itself would leave scars. But Cyleria knew that the Exarathian Empire had proven its strength. Ethan turned to her, his expression solemn. "We did it. The Ilthar are defeated." She nodded slowly. "Yes, but the real work begins now. Rebuilding, uniting, and keeping the peace. This war may be over, but the consequences will linger." The tension between them, the unspoken bond that had grown through their shared struggle, was undeniable. Cyleria had trusted Ethan with her empire's future, and he had delivered. Yet there was more than just loyalty between them now. There was understanding, a deep, unspoken respect, and perhaps something more. Ethan knew that they couldn't undo the damage that had been done, but he had helped her win. And that meant something. It meant that together, they had a chance to rebuild, to create something better. Cyleria glanced at him, her eyes softening. I couldn't have done it without you, Ethan. You've proven yourself in ways I never imagined. Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. You trusted me when no one else did. I couldn't have done it without you either. She looked away, her eyes drawn to the view outside the bridge windows. The stars shone brightly, but there was a heavy silence between them. It wasn't just the war that had ended, it was a chapter in both of their lives. Ethan had come to this galaxy as a slave, a tool to be used. But now he stood at the heart of an empire that had embraced him. His journey had changed him forever, and it had changed Xyleria too. I need you, Ethan, Xyleria said quietly, turning back to face him. Not just as a commander, but as someone I can trust, as someone I can rely on. Ethan felt a strange pull in his chest. The words she spoke weren't just those of a ruler to her loyal servant. They were words that held more meaning. She wasn't just asking for his loyalty anymore. She was asking for something deeper. I'll always be here for you, Xyleria, he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. Whatever comes next, I'll stand by you. Her expression softened, the hardness of her previous demeanor melting away. Thank you, she whispered. There was a pause between them, a moment where the weight of everything that had happened seemed to settle. The war was over, but the future remained uncertain. Xyleria's empire needed rebuilding, and she needed allies who were willing to help, who could guide her through the challenges ahead. Ethan was more than a commander now. He had become someone irreplaceable, someone who had fought for her, fought for the empire, and, in a way, fought for himself. The Exarathians had won, but their journey was far from over. Together, they would rebuild, but it would require sacrifices, trust, unity, and a shared vision for the future. Xyleria, Ethan said, his voice breaking the silence. What happens now? She turned to face him fully, her eyes reflecting a mix of uncertainty and hope. Now, we rebuild. We create something stronger, a future where the mistakes of the past won't be repeated. Ethan nodded, understanding. The war had been brutal, but it had also shown them the strength they both carried. They were survivors, and they had the chance to shape the galaxy in a new direction. Together, Xyleria took a step closer to Ethan, her gaze softening. I never imagined this would happen, our paths crossing, our fates entwined. But now I can't imagine going forward without you by my side. Ethan's heart raced, his breath catching in his throat. He had always known that Xyleria was strong, a queen capable of anything. But what she was offering him now was something even greater, an opportunity to build something together, to be partners in more than just war. I'm honored, Ethan said, his voice low but filled with emotion. And I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, the weight of everything they had fought for seemed to lift. The future, uncertain as it was, now held new possibilities. There would be challenges ahead, but together, they could face anything. The war had ended, but the real work, the work of rebuilding, of leading, of dreaming, was just beginning. As they stood together, staring out into the vast expanse of stars, the promise of a new beginning hung in the air. A new chapter, not just for the Empire, but for them both.